Today we're going to talk about the most prolific serial killer who is not a war criminal in modern history. He was convicted of killing 189 minor boys in one country, likely killed 4 more in a neighboring country, and if his post-conviction confession is to be believed, another 28 people that the police knew nothing about, raising his victim count to 221. There were also more than 200 victims who survived. Who was he? How did he get away with vicious crimes on so many people? How was this dangerous man stopped in his tracks by two 12-year-olds and a teenager? Well, that's the best part of the whole story, so let's get into it. His full name is Luis Alfredo Garavito Cubillas. He was born in Colombia in 1957. There they call him La Bestia, or the Beast, or Tribilin, Goofy. His early life wasn't much different than other serial killers: an alcoholic and cheating father, violence in front of the children, neglect, abuse, bullying at school, sexual abuse by a neighbor. He says he was once strapped to a tree and beaten with a machete case by his father after he tried to defend his mother. Garavito made a lot of claims about extreme abuse he suffered, and most of those would be credibly questioned by experts and interviewers. We won't repeat them here, given that most of the graphic retellings are likely untrue, stories Garavito told to minimize and explain away his own behavior. The neighbor probably did abuse him, but it was unlikely to have been nearly as severe and graphic as Garavito would claim. He did fondle his siblings, something he would claim later was such a minor thing that there is no way the siblings would even remember it. He would say that he first molested somebody outside the home in 1969, when he victimized a 6-year-old boy. He would have been about 12 then, and according to those around him, he had become very withdrawn, extremely aggressive, and angry by then. His family moved to Trujillo in 1971. Garavito says he was raped by another neighbor there and that he had become impotent due to the abuse he had already suffered. He claims to have never told family of any of these abuses. He developed a problem with alcohol and aggressively tried to initiate sexual relationships with women by the time he was 15. He was rejected every time. He was thrown out of his house that same year after his mother caught him attempting to rape a 5-year-old boy. He was let back home only to be kicked out the following year when he attempted to sexually assault a 6-year-old boy at a train station in Bogota. This would be his first arrest, and to explain it away, he would tell authorities he only wanted to lightly molest the boy. His father wasn't angry about the charge. His father was angry about the gender of his victim. He was kicked out again one last time for being homosexual. His young adult years were chaotic, to say the least. He couldn't hold down a job because he would end up becoming violent with bosses and coworkers. He was an alcoholic who had a violent temper when he was drunk, who couldn't maintain a relationship with a woman because of his violence and his impotence. He was at times suicidal and at other times expressed homicidal ideations for his family. He would join AA but drink anyway, and go to church to figuratively beat his chest in remorse for all his bad behavior. The whole time he was nearly compulsively molesting girls and boys, though as time went on, he developed an almost exclusive preference for pubescent boys. By the early 80s, the molesting had become violent rapes of the children. After each horrific abuse, he would write the name of the victim in a blue notebook. He would then pace naked in his room while beating his chest and praying for the child. He would cry from guilt and laugh from pleasure in the same moment, recalling the things he had done. He was a deeply, deeply sick man, and it would get darker. He would be treated temporarily and then released or medicated from time to time, but none of those things was ever followed through, and he would always hide what he'd been doing from those seeking to treat him. He would escalate again by claiming trophies from his victims. These he would hide in black cloth suitcases that he stored in various residences of female friends of his. His friends at that point had not yet suspected him of pedophilia, but they soon would. In 1992, he is estimated to have raped and tortured more than 200 children, mostly boys. He would say that while playing with a Ouija board, the devil told him to begin killing. When he tried to commit his first murder, police actually interrupted and beat him, likely not understanding that Garavito was with the boy with the intention of killing him. They stole from him and then they let him go. He began killing on October 4th, 1992, with a boy named Juan Carlos. His modus operandi was nearly always the same. He would wear one of several disguises. He would lure a boy, usually a child of a street vendor, sometimes a street kid. Sometimes the lure would be alcohol, sometimes candy, sometimes money. He would brutally attack and then kill the child, keeping a trophy. We won't go into the details of the attack other than to say they were among the worst types one could imagine. Some of the worst any serial killer has ever done. He would usually leave containers of lubricant, empty bottles of cheap brandy, near the naked bodies. The trophy was usually something paper, a ticket, a receipt, an ID card, but sometimes it was clothing, and early on, it was their amputated toes. You heard me. Don't need to say that again. He stopped doing that when he realized that police dogs might find those, and so he got rid of them. He would then obsessively pace, reading from the Bible, and beat his chest again. Nearly all of his victims were between 8 and 16. The whole time his life remained chaotic. He hardly ever had a place to stay. He fought with everyone. He continued to drink and get violent and then apologize. He continued to be seriously unpredictable, and more he was drifting town to town until he wore out his welcome and moved on. During this time, he killed 4 children in Ecuador and possibly one in Venezuela. The Ecuadorians almost caught him, but he managed to slip back across the border. In Colombia, he had taken children from at least 59 different Colombian cities and towns, in at least 11 different departments. He was getting bored with the children and began to plan a mass murder, hoping to get the attention of the media and also hoping to die in the process of trying to kill a large group of people. He was arrested before he could follow through with this plan. Colombia was involved in a decades-long civil war at the time, and so missing children were not really noticed and were rarely even reported missing. And this is what allowed Garavito away so very long. It would be mass graves that alerted authorities. They found some 36 children in a grave in Pereira, then 41 in Risaralda, 27 more in Valdecoca. At first, authorities thought that a satanic cult or trafficking ring had left all these children, but investigators soon realized that they were probably looking for only one man, one who used the same nylon cord and left the liquor caps found at all of the crime scenes. In Palmyra, more children were discovered, unburied this time and left lying on a hill. They were found because Garavito fell asleep with a cigarette in his hand and lit a nearby sugarcane field ablaze. He left behind his money, a pair of glasses, short shoes, and even his underwear at this site. It was enough to develop a good profile. He was a middle-aged man with an astigmatism from the glasses. He walked with a limp and was probably 5'4" to 5'6" from the shoes. They made a false arrest of a local sex offender who limped, but more children disappeared and it became obvious police did not yet have their man. They had a note with one of Garavito's girlfriend's name and address on it. The lead detective began to narrow down suspects until he focused in on Garavito. They contacted the girlfriend and she handed over the suitcase that Garavito left at her home. Pictures of young boys, the detailed journals, tally marks, bills, and receipts showing where he'd been and when. They released the wrongly accused man and went to find Garavito. He wasn't at his listed residence. That property was empty. He was probably traveling, they thought, looking for his next victim. Garavito wasn't too careful, and he also wasn't aware of the massive police presence who were looking for one man, him. He was picked up by a local police officer only a few days after the authorities got a hold of that suitcase. He tried to rape a 12-year-old boy in Villa Vicencio. He was in the midst of terrorizing the boy when a homeless child overheard the screaming and the struggle. This teen man, well, all I can say is thank all that is good in the world for that kid. He began to curse and yell and whip stones at Garavito. Garavito tried to charge him away with a dagger, but the kid wasn't having it. He grabbed the boy and together they escaped to a farmhouse. There was a 12-year-old girl there, and she is our second hero. She stood outside and waited as Garavito came past. He asked her for directions on where the two boys had gone. He directed him into thick woods nearby, and he got lost in there. Meanwhile, the kids contacted police and sent them into the woods. He was arrested as he tried to make his way out. An angry mob had formed by then, and police convinced the mob not to hurt the man. He gave a false ID, but the local police had heard about the hunt for Garavito, and they suspected that is exactly who they just captured. They were right. Colombia's Justice Department took over from there. There was a confession to 147 murders, but you never rely on the confession of a serial killer, or anyone really. You have to follow that up, and they did. They found the glasses and his condition. They meticulously collected DNA found on every body they discovered, everyone they found after his arrest. They collected DNA from the bottles of brandy, the bottle caps, his underwear, his shoes, every scrap of everything he left behind at every scene. They made him have an eye exam to confirm his condition, and they made it mandatory for all prisoners to reduce the risk that he would try to fool the examiner. That worked. They took DNA from his pillow and other areas of his cell to compare to the evidence. He was charged with 172 counts of murder in Colombia and was convicted of 138, with the rest put on pause because, well, he was already sentenced to 1,853 years and 9 days in prison, so because Garavito led police to bodies they hadn't already found, his sentence was reduced to 22 years. 40 years was the maximum actual imprisonment in Colombia at the time. He was kept in isolation for fear another prisoner would kill him for bragging rights or from sheer revenge. He would have been eligible for parole in 2023. While in prison, he confessed to more murders, including 4 adults he killed because they had been witnesses to the things he had done. He tried to get out in 2021 early for good behavior, but a judge prevented that from happening because he failed to pay the victim's fine that had been levied on him. By that time, he already had advanced eye cancer and leukemia. He was blind and weak and required daily medical care. And before he could be paroled, he died of his illnesses last October, age 66. He was never tried in Ecuador nor in Venezuela. As a result of the idea that Garavito could be released, Colombia raised its maximum sentence to 60 years. Thank you for listening. If you're enjoying these videos and want more, don't forget to subscribe and turn on your notifications so that you don't miss any videos. Thank you for watching. We really appreciate it.